Chapter 1. The Council of Erl. The morning light spilled softly through the high-arched windows of the stone hall, casting golden beams across ancient tapestries and dust-laced air. The floor, made of dark polished wood, echoed faintly under the heavy boots of the 9 village men as they walked in unison. Each wore a jacket of deep red leather, worn by wind and time, their hands calloused by honest labor, their eyes filled with purpose. At the far end of the hall, beneath a high vaulted ceiling where cobwebs hung like forgotten stories, sat the Lord of Erl. His chair, carved from blackened oak, rose like a throne carved by centuries, marked with the symbols of his ancestors. He was a man of age and wisdom, with long silver hair flowing like a river of moonlight down his shoulders. Draped in a cloak the color of old blood, he watched them with a gaze both calm and powerful. The room held its breath as the spokesman stepped forward, a tall man with steady eyes and a voice shaped by the wind of the fields. Behind him, the others stood silent, their faces proud but weathered, waiting for the words that had long been formed in quiet meetings and fire-lit nights. The spokesman stepped forward, his boots echoing on the wooden floor like soft drumbeats before a storm. He stood tall, lit by flickering torchlight that danced across the stone walls, casting long shadows behind him. A hush fell over the chamber. Only the crackling of the great hearth fire dared to speak. His voice rose, strong but laced with something ancient, yearning passed down through generations. For 7 centuries, your bloodline has ruled us with strength and honor, he said. Your fathers were just, your grandfathers wise. Their names still travel in the songs of wandering minstrels, their stories living on in firelight ballads and moonlit whispers. But he paused, glancing at the others beside him. The years pass like leaves on the wind, and nothing ever truly changes. The world beyond our hills dances with wonder, and yet we remain untouched, quiet, forgotten. A cold wind stirred outside, rattling the high stained glass windows as if the world beyond had heard the plea. The Lord leaned forward, his silver hair catching the orange glow of the flames, his eyes sharp and searching. "What is it that you seek?" he asked, his voice deep and still, yet carrying the weight of centuries. The spokesman answered slowly, every word echoing with resolve. "We wish to be ruled not by tradition alone, but by something greater, by a lord of magic, one who walks with wonder, who carries enchantment in his very breath. We crave not just history, but legend." Silence. Then thunder rolled far in the distance, soft and slow, as though the heavens themselves were listening. The firelight dimmed for a moment. The air grew thicker, charged. The Lord stood. His presence seemed to grow taller, the carved sigils of his throne flickering with shadow. His cloak whispered across the stone as he stepped down, his voice calm but filled with ancient strength. "So be it," he said, and his words seemed to resonate beyond the hall. 500 years have passed since such a desire echoed within these walls. Yet the voice of the council is sacred. You have spoken. He raised his hand slightly, like sealing a pact. So be it. The torches flared as if breathing in the new destiny. Outside, the wind howled through the hills of Erl, carrying the scent of magic that had not touched those lands in centuries. A new age had begun, and the world quietly took notice. The old lord lifted his hand slowly, the firelight gleaming off his silver rings. His voice dropped to a low murmur, ancient and full of quiet power. "Go with my blessing," he said, his palm raised in a sign passed down through blood and time. And the men bowed, not just in duty, but in awe, then turned and walked from the red chamber, their footsteps quiet but certain. The great wooden doors creaked open, letting in a gust of cool wind scented with earth and smoke, and then slowly closed behind them with a deep final thud. Outside, the village of Erl stretched beneath a pale sky, clouds drifting like slow dreams over green hills. The men went back to their daily lives, but something inside them had changed. There was a spark now, quiet but glowing, like embers waiting for breath. One returned to the forge, the rhythm of his hammer ringing louder than before. Another stitched leather with steadier hands, his mind no longer lost in the present but wandering into the unknown. Gardeners touched flowers with more care, sensing a whisper in the wind that hadn't been there yesterday. Farmers dug their hands into the soil, feeling the pulse of the earth, and wondered what magic might soon rise from its depths. They followed the old ways, yes, but now they looked up, beyond the hills, toward wonder. And high above it all, in the quiet red room, the old lord remained. He stood alone in the firelight for a long moment, then moved to his writing desk, an heirloom of dark elm, etched with faded runes. With a firm hand, he penned a single message. The ink gleamed like wet coal. "Come to me, my son." A servant was summoned. The message was sealed with the house crest, an ancient silver tree, and sent riding swift through the valleys. For now the future rested in the hands of the eldest son. It wasn't long before the son arrived. He stepped quietly into the great hall, the weight of his boots softened by ancient stone. His presence carried youth and strength. Tall, broad-shouldered, his cloak still marked with the dust of long roads. Yet before his father, he bowed low, as all generations had done before him. The old lord sat motionless in his carved wooden chair, its edges worn smooth by centuries of rule. He hadn't shifted since the council ended. The room around him had grown darker now. The sun had dipped low, and the last golden rays streamed in from the tall arched windows above, casting long shadows across the floor. Light spilled across his weathered face, revealing eyes that seemed not to look at his son, but far beyond him. Eyes deep with memory, yet still searching the future, a future he knew he would never see. And still, he sat tall, his back straight, his presence commanding. Without rising, without ceremony, the old lord spoke. His voice was soft, but it carried the force of command. "My son," he said, eyes now meeting his, "you are to leave Erl." The words hung in the air like an ancient bell struck only once, quiet but echoing through the very walls. The son remained still, waiting for the rest, heart already thudding beneath his armor. He could feel it. This was no ordinary mission. This was legacy. And as the firelight flickered low, the old lord gave his son the command that would shape the fate of Erl, an echo into myth. The old lord's voice was low, but filled with urgency, like a flame flickering against the wind. "Go, my son," he said, "before the last of my days fade like smoke in the dusk. Time presses close now, so waste none of it. Leave at once. Travel eastward." He leaned forward slightly, the shadows of the room gathering behind him like silent witnesses. "Go beyond the farmlands and pastures we have known since birth. Keep walking until the world begins to change beneath your feet, until the air feels strange and the sky softens into twilight that never lifts. That is where Faerie begins." Alveric, the young man, listened closely, his eyes narrowing as the weight of his father's words sank in. He had heard of those lands only in lullabies and whispered tavern tales. No map showed their borders. "That's a long way," Alveric said quietly. "Yes," the old lord replied. "Very far." Alveric's gaze shifted slightly, thoughtful. "And even farther to return," he said almost to himself. "They say the paths in Faerie bend like dreams. A mile may be a moment, or a lifetime." The old man nodded slowly. "Even so." Silence filled the chamber, the hearth crackled faintly, dust swirled in golden shafts of dying light. Then Alveric asked, "What do you ask of me, father, when I finally find that place?" The old lord's eyes sharpened, cold steel beneath age. "You must marry her," he said. Alveric blinked. "Marry who?" The old man did not waver. "The daughter of the king of Elfland." Alveric stood still, lost in a quiet storm of thought. He had never seen her, not even in dreams. And yet, he knew her. He had heard the old songs, sung on lonely hills where the wind moved like breath through the grass. He remembered the soft voices that carried her name at twilight, where wild strawberries hid beneath the leaves, glowing red beneath the early stars. No one knew who sang those songs. Sometimes there was no singer at all, just a voice in the air, light as mist, repeating her name like a spell. Lyrazel. Her name drifted through the mind like a distant bell in the fog, sweet, strange, and haunting. He imagined her the way the tales described, a crown of frost resting lightly on her silver hair, her eyes holding the shimmer of morning dew under moonlight. She was beauty wrapped in wonder, a mystery carved in starlight, not of this world, not of any world he truly understood. But now, she was his path, his quest. Lyrazel was no ordinary princess. She was born of an ancient, enchanted bloodline, one touched by stars and sealed in magic. On the day of her birth, the skies above Elfland shimmered as though holding their breath. The air was thick with silence and wonder. From the heavens, the gods themselves sent their shadows, not their bodies, for even they could not fully enter the realm of Elfland, but vast, silent shapes that stretched across the land like drifting veils of night. They moved slowly over the meadows, casting holy darkness on the dew-covered grass. The earth seemed to pause beneath them. The fairies had planned to attend her christening too, but when they saw those deep and mighty shadows glide over their sacred fields, they grew afraid, not of harm, but of awe. So instead they hid, gathering in delicate clusters beneath the trembling petals of pale pink anemones, their wings tucked close, their glow dimmed. From their secret hiding places, they whispered ancient blessings into the breeze, letting the wind carry their magic to the child. And thus, the newborn princess was touched by both heaven and fairy, light and shadow, wonder and power. Her name was Lyrazel, child of enchantment, born to walk between worlds. The old lord sat heavy in his carved throne, shadows of evening falling around him like memories too old to name. His voice, though weathered by time, still carried the authority of centuries. "My people," he said, his gaze distant and heavy, "desire a ruler of magic. In their yearning for wonder, they have chosen foolishly." He paused, the weight of unspoken consequences hanging thick in the air. "Only the dark ones, those ancient beings who never show their faces, know what this path truly leads to. We, the sightless, must obey tradition. It is our way. The voice of the people, spoken in Parliament, must be honored." He turned his eyes, wise and tired, toward his son, a faint gleam of hope flickering in their depths. Perhaps some hidden wisdom, long forgotten, still lingers in their wish. Perhaps fate is kinder than it appears. You must go now, with your eyes fixed eastward, toward that faint glow, barely more than a whisper of light, that spills from the edge of fairyland. It is the light that dances in the sky between sunset's final breath and the first shimmer of stars. Let that twilight be your compass, and it will lead you past the known fields, beyond the world we understand. The chamber grew silent for a breath, heavy with destiny. Then, with trembling hands, the old lord reached down and unbuckled a thick, time-worn leather strap. From his side, he lifted a massive sword, its grip smooth from the touch of generations. The blade caught the fading sunlight, flashing silver like the last gleam of day. He held it out with reverence. "Take this," he said. "This sword has guarded our bloodline for more years than men remember. It has weathered battles, storms, and the darkness between ages. Let it protect you now, even as you step beyond the fields we know, into lands shaped by dreams and danger alike." The young man received it, bowing slightly, not just to his father, but to the weight of all who came before. And in that moment, the journey truly began. Though the young man accepted the heavy sword with quiet respect, a silent thought lingered in his heart. This blade, forged by men, cannot face the powers that dwell in lands not bound by time or reason. He wrapped the weapon across his back and turned toward the wild highlands where lightning danced and the air always smelled of storms. There, on the edge of the world, beyond the last breath of Erl's civilization, lived a witch, alone. Her cottage stood like a shadowed secret upon a steep hill where thunder rolled freely across the sky. The land around her was raw and restless, scorched in places by ancient storms. In the summers, the clouds would gather like beasts above her roof, and the heavens would rumble as if remembering something long forgotten. She lived in a narrow house of thatch, twisted and aged, half swallowed by ivy. Smoke that smelled faintly of burnt herbs and old magic curled from the crooked chimney. This witch was no common conjurer. She walked alone through the high meadows where no other soul dared to wander, her long, dark cloak trailing over wild grass. With bare hands, she gathered the fallen thunderbolts, shards of skyfire that had never touched a blacksmith's flame. These were no weapons of mortal metal. They were sky-born, forged in the heart of storms, and tempered by ancient runes only she could chant. From these, she crafted tools and blades not meant for earthly battles, but for what waited beyond, the strange, the unseen, the forgotten. And it was to her that Alveric would now go, for only such a witch could prepare him for the world that waited just past the twilight veil. In the early tides of spring, when the winds carried scents of blooming violets and the sky softened into dusky lilac, the old witch would sometimes walk the gardens of Erl, not as the hunched and haunted figure feared by many, but as something else entirely. She would take the form of a young woman, ageless and radiant, her voice a song that seemed to wake the petals of the tallest flowers. Her beauty didn't seem born of this earth. It felt borrowed, like a dream slipping into the world just for an hour. She always came when the hawk moths first fluttered from bellflower to bellflower, in that strange, breathless pause between day and dusk. No one dared to follow her, but one had seen her, the young heir of Erl. He had once wandered into the garden at that sacred hour, and when he saw her, standing beneath a flowering tree singing to no one, he could not look away. Her voice wrapped around his heart like ivy. Her eyes shimmered like starlight caught in dew, and even though legends whispered that to love her was doom, he stared. Whether it was pity, curiosity, or some ancient rule of balance, she did not harm him. Instead, she revealed herself. In a blink, the illusion of youth faded. Her beauty crumbled into the truth of centuries. Her eyes turned ancient. Her skin withered like fallen leaves. She became the creature she truly was, a witch of storm and stone. Yet even then, he didn't flinch. His eyes didn't leave her. And in that moment of fragile silence, when others would have run in terror, he stayed. And for that, she gave him something no spell or offering could ever buy, her gratitude. She beckoned him to follow, and he did. He climbed the high hill where thunder always whispered secrets, and there she taught him things no mortal book ever held. She told him of a sword, not forged by any blacksmith's fire, but made of sky-born metal, gathered from fallen lightning and bound together with ancient runes. This weapon, she had said, can push away any strike of a man's sword. And if you inscribe it with 3 forgotten master runes, even Elfland's magic cannot pierce it. The young man listened, and he remembered. Because deep in his heart, even back then he knew, his path would one day lead beyond the world of men, into the land of enchantment. As he tightened the grip on his father's ancient sword, the young man's thoughts drifted, not to glory or fear, but to her, the witch who once spared him. The sky was still wearing its last layer of gold when he left the castle of Erl. The valley lay in a sleepy hush, and the wind whispered softly through the trees, as if it, too, knew where he was going. His steps were fast and full of silent purpose, boots brushing wild thyme as he climbed the shadowed path that led to the highland where the witch lived, alone, near the place where thunder liked to sleep. By the time he reached the summit, the last breath of light still lingered on the moorland grasses. There, beside a flickering fire in the open, he saw her, the old witch of storms, silhouetted against the growing night, feeding dry bones into the flames. The fire crackled and hissed, casting strange shadows that danced like spirits on the ground. Without hesitation, he stepped forward. "The day has come," he said quietly. "The day I need what you promised." She didn't look surprised. Instead, she turned toward him slowly, eyes glowing faintly beneath her tangled hair, and pointed toward a crooked garden that sloped beside her hut. "Then go," she rasped. "Dig beneath my cabbages. The earth there remembers lightning. Bring me what sleeps under the roots." He nodded once and turned to the garden. The soil was oddly warm, soft as if it had been stirred by storms. Moonlight filtered through the clouds in broken shards as he knelt between crooked rows of leafy cabbages. His fingers dug into the earth, cool and wet, brushing against something strange, smooth, dense, and warm to the touch, like stone kissed by lightning. Thunderbolts. One by one, he unearthed them, each one humming faintly, alive with a power not born of earth. His hands grew numb, but he kept going. His eyes strained in the dimming light, and shadows stretched long across the hill. By the time full night had settled over the world, he had found 17 thunderbolts, 17 pieces of the storm, pulled from the bones of the earth itself. Carefully, reverently, he wrapped them in a soft silk kerchief, each one heavy with promise and danger. He rose and carried them back to her, where the fire still burned low, and the witch waited like the keeper of some forgotten fate. The young man laid the thunderbolts gently on the grass beside the fire, 17 relics from a realm not meant for mortal hands. They weren't magical on their own, but they had touched the skies, danced through lightning, and now rested in the hands of a witch who knew what to do with their raw, untamed energy. These stones had fallen through storms, shaken from celestial paths beyond any man's reach. And now, here they were, lying silent beneath the witch's knowing eyes. She set aside an old scorched thigh bone, a remnant from some long-dead skeptic who never believed in the power she wielded. Her fingers, thin and sharp as twigs, moved with purpose as she arranged the thunderbolts in a perfect line beside the glowing fire, each one aligned like soldiers awaiting a secret command. Without a word, she picked up her blackened witch's staff. More than a tool, it was a scepter of forgotten ages, and began nudging burning logs and red embers over the stones. The fire hissed as it consumed the damp air, burying the thunderbolts beneath glowing ash and flame. Then she stepped back, her figure framed by the rising smoke and flickering shadows. Her arms rose slowly, fingers stretched like claws reaching into the heavens. And then she spoke the rune, a word not meant for human tongues, a sound that twisted the air, a force that split the silence. In an instant, the fire roared to life, shooting up into the dark like a furious spirit awakened from centuries of slumber. What had moments before been a humble fire, no different than any other, now pulsed with an energy so strange, so terrible, that even the wind seemed to pull away from it. The night held its breath. The flames weren't just fire anymore, they were alive. And what burned within them was no longer just wood and stone, but a weapon in the making. A blade the world had never seen, a thing of storm and spell, being born in the heart of flame. As the green flames surged higher, whipped alive by her ancient runes, they hissed and roared like beasts unleashed. The air around the fire shimmered with heat waves so intense they seemed to bend reality itself. The witch stepped back, inch by inch, her voice rising louder with every step, chanting spells that felt as old as the hills. Her voice echoed over the moor like a storm brewing just out of sight. "More wood," she barked, and Alveric, his face lit by the unnatural green fire, obeyed without hesitation. He grabbed the thick black oak logs that lay scattered across the heath, logs older than memory, and threw them into the inferno. The fire devoured them instantly, the flames crackling hungrily, reaching higher into the night sky like glowing claws. The heat lashed out now, untouchable and merciless, forcing Alveric to retreat step by step until he could go no further. Still, the witch chanted. Still, the fire rose, and within that blaze, buried under glowing coals and sacred runes, the 17 thunderstones trembled, their cores reliving the cosmic firestorms that had hurled them to earth. It was as if the heavens themselves were reforging them, giving them one final purpose. Then came silence. Suddenly, the fire collapsed, just like that, as if a spell had snapped shut. The roaring light was gone, leaving behind only a dull, hellish glow spread across the earth. A blackened circle smoldered like a wound on the land, pulsing red like the eye of something angry and ancient. And there, lying flat in the heart of that glow, still molten but taking form, was the sword. Not forged by man, not born of earth, but called into being by storm and sorcery. It shimmered in the dark like liquid light, alive, waiting. The witch stepped forward, her silhouette glowing softly in the dim red light of the dying embers. From beneath her dark robe, she drew a blade, sleek, curved, and ancient, and began to shape the newborn sword with slow, deliberate strokes. Sparks danced with each pass, whispering into the night like memories being carved into destiny. Once satisfied, she placed the sword gently onto the cool earth beside her, and then she sang. But this was no incantation, no curse, no fiery spell. This was a song only the stars might recognize, a lullaby born of wind through wildflower meadows that no longer bloom, a tune like soft wind swaying forgotten gardens where children once played long ago, places that now live only in dreams. Her voice was a breeze, wandering through the ruins of memory, gently stirring up golden echoes of laughter, the shimmer of sunlit afternoons, the brush of hands long gone. She sang of things half remembered, moments that almost returned to us in sleep, only to vanish again just as we reach for them. It was a melody that didn't heal wounds, but made you remember they were once beautiful scars. And as the blade cooled under her song, it didn't just harden into metal. It absorbed that sorrow, that wonder, that fleeting light of forgotten joy. This wasn't just a weapon anymore, it was memory made steel. She sang of forgotten summer afternoons, of wildflowers that once danced under golden skies, of harebells swaying in meadows no human now walks. On that lonely, windswept heath, her voice became a spell of remembrance, a song that bottled lost mornings, sealed the dew of vanished evenings, and whispered old sunlight back into the night. Alveric stood silent, watching her. Tiny wings fluttered near the fire, moths perhaps, or spirits of days long buried, drawn to the song as if it had summoned them from time itself. And while she sang, the strange white metal lying in the earth began to shift. It thickened, it glowed red like a slow burning heart, then deeper, darker, cooling, tightening. The surface hardened as if pulling the night around itself. Tiny cracks sealed, and in that closing moment, the blade breathed. It inhaled the air, the earth, the echo of her rune, and trapped it forever inside. The sword was no longer just forged, it was awakened. Within its blackened edge, the scent of time lingered. The breeze of English downs slept inside its steel. You could hear the early birds of April singing if you held it close enough. It held the ghost of lilacs, the joy of laughing streams, the hush of shepherds watching over silent hills, and the light of miles and miles of blooming May. And by the time it had cooled to black, it had gathered all the magic that still dares to hide in the old wild places of the world. A sword born not just of fire, but of Earth's forgotten wonder. No one can truly explain everything about that sword. The scientists, those who chart the dance of stars and map the floating paths of ancient metals drifting through space, they might tell you what elements once wandered in the void before Earth's gravity pulled them down. But they have no time for magic. And the mystics, those who understand why songs touch the soul, why stories survive centuries, and who can name the 50 forgotten branches of magic, they might tell you what a rune can do or how a flame remembers, but not what the stars are made of. They have no time for science, and so neither side can explain the sword. But here is what we do know. It was once part of the cosmos, a drifting fragment of silence and starlight, a dead stone in the dark, until Earth reached out, caught it, and gave it a destiny. Now it is more than metal. It hums faintly, like a song remembered in sleep. It holds something no formula can define, something like longing, like wonder, like the echo of forgotten worlds. It was once like every other stone. Now it is different. Now it feels. And what exactly it has become, let the poets name it. Let the sorcerers wield it. Let the dreamers feel it. The sword doesn't need to be explained. It only needs to be held. Now, the witch stepped forward, her fingers steady and sure, and gripped the hilt of the sword. It was black as a stormy midnight sky, its surface still pulsing faintly with the heat of creation. The hilt was thick, its back curved like the spine of some ancient beast. She had cleverly dug a shallow groove beneath it earlier, allowing the blade to lie perfectly flat in the earth, undisturbed while it cooled. With a slow, deliberate pull, she lifted the blade from the glowing soil. Ash clung to its edges. Heat shimmered across its length like a mirage. In her other hand, she held a strange greenish stone, smooth, unnatural, and humming faintly with power. And then, like an artist carving her final touch into a masterpiece, she began to sharpen the sword. Each stroke of the stone whispered across the blade, hissing softly like a snake in tall grass. She worked in rhythm, back and forth, edge to edge, never rushing, never pausing. All the while, she sang. But this song was unlike the ones before. It was not violent like the runes that summoned fire, nor soft like the melody that cooled the metal. It was eerie, ancient, echoing through the air like the wind that passes through forgotten ruins. A sound that didn't just move through the world, it remembered it. With each pass of the stone, the blade grew sharper. With each note of the song, the magic wove itself deeper into the steel. This was no ordinary weapon. It was being prepared for something far greater than battle. It was being prepared for legend. Alveric stood silently, watching her. He didn't blink, didn't move. Time seemed to stretch thin, like mist over the moor. Maybe it was just a few moments. Maybe the stars had shifted halfway across the sky. He couldn't tell. And then suddenly, she stopped. With a quiet grace, the witch rose to her feet. In both hands, she held the finished sword, flat across her palms, like an offering or a farewell. It no longer pulsed with heat. but something deeper still shimmered inside it, something ancient and awake. She stepped toward him and thrust the blade toward his chest, not violently but firmly, decisively. No words, no ceremony, just purpose. Alveric reached out and took it. The metal felt cold, heavier than it looked, almost as if it knew its destiny. She turned away quickly, too quickly, and just before her face slipped into the shadows, he caught something in her eyes, a flicker of something unsaid. It was a look that said she wanted to keep the sword, or maybe she wanted to keep him. He opened his mouth to thank her, but the space where she stood was already empty. He called out, once, twice. He knocked on the crooked door of that old, whispering house. "Witch!" he called. "Witch!" His voice echoed across the lonely heath, spilled over the moor and drifted all the way to distant farms, where children stirred in their sleep, wide-eyed and afraid. But no answer came, only the wind. And so, gripping the magical sword tight, Alveric turned and began the long walk back home. It was better that way. Chapter 2. Alveric sees the Elfin Mountains. High above the waking world in a tall stone tower where shadows still clung to the corners, Alveric stirred in his sleep. A single golden beam of the rising sun slipped through the narrow window and kissed his face. His eyes blinked open, slow, dreamy, and then widened with sudden clarity. The sword, that black blade born of fire and rune song, was real. A rush of joy swept through him. Not just the delight of owning something rare, but something more, something alive. The sword lay beside his bed, still and silent, yet it seemed to hum faintly in his thoughts like an echo carried back from the world of dreams. And perhaps that wasn't far from the truth. After all, it was a weapon shaped by magic, and Dreamland had always been a native country of such things. Even before he touched it, he could feel it. Not as cold steel, but as a presence, a whisper, an unspoken promise of destiny. This was no ordinary morning. This was the morning after finding a magical sword. And as many before him had felt, and those in legends yet to come would feel again, that first morning joy, so clear, so bright, so deep it stirred the soul, could only come from the bond between a hero and a blade forged by enchantment. Alveric had no goodbyes to offer, no tearful farewells. He simply decided it was better to leave at once without explanation than to stay behind and justify the choice of a sword not gifted by his father but born of witchcraft and firelight. He didn't even wait to eat. Instead, he packed a little food in a weathered cloth satchel and flung it over one shoulder. A flask made of new leather hung by his hip, empty still, but he trusted the wild would offer water. Mountains have streams, and streams have stories, and he was headed toward both. On his hip rested his father's old sword, worn like any warrior might wear a blade. But across his back, slung at an angle, was the black sword, the one shaped by rune and song, its rough handle tied close to his shoulder, humming faintly against his spine. He took only a small pouch of copper coins, no more than a handful, just enough for the world he knew. For beyond the twilight frontier, where he journeyed now, who could say what coin was used? Perhaps they traded in dreams, or silence, or stars. Without looking back, without a single word, Alveric walked away from the castle of Erl, his home disappearing behind trees and mist, and stepped into legend. The Vale of Erl lay close, too close, to the place where the known world ended. Beyond it stretched lands where maps faded and logic held no power. Alveric climbed a grassy hill under the wide-open sky, his boots brushing through dew-soaked meadows. He moved swiftly, passing fields that whispered of home, then through a quiet hazel forest where sunlight danced on leaves and the wind hummed old lullabies. Above him, the sky glowed a cheerful blue. But as he entered the woods, something magical happened. The very earth beneath him shimmered blue too, as if the heavens had dropped to the ground. It was bluebell season. A sea of tiny flowers swayed around him, their soft fragrance trailing behind like a memory of childhood. He paused once to eat under the shade of a mossy tree and filled his leather flask at a spring that sang as it flowed. Then he walked on, eastward, all day, through light, through shadow, through silence. And just as the sun began to lean towards sleep, the distant mountains of Faerie appeared. They didn't rise like ordinary peaks. They floated into view, delicate, otherworldly, painted in the soft hue of pale forget-me-nots, as if the horizon itself had begun to dream. Alveric stood still for a moment. He had reached the edge. The fields he knew lay behind him, and before him, magic. The sun was sinking low behind Alveric, casting golden fire across the fields he had left behind. Hills and trees blushed in its glow, shadows stretched long like ancient memories returning to rest. But the enchanted mountains ahead, untouched, unchanged, unmoved. Alveric watched closely, expecting those soft blue peaks to shimmer with sunset's flame, to catch even a hint of the orange and crimson burning behind him. But they didn't. Not even a whisper of color touched their surface. Their cliffs didn't soften, their edges didn't blur, and no deepening shadow wrapped their sides. It was as though they weren't truly part of this world. And in that moment, Alveric understood something ancient, something unspoken. Nothing that happens here in the world of men can touch the realm of enchantment. Time, light, even the glory of the setting sun meant nothing beyond that invisible border. The fairyland stood eternal, as if they had been carved from dream and spell and sealed forever beyond the reach of change. Alveric turned his gaze away from the silent, ghostly mountains, those pale, unchanging peaks lost in their own dream of time. He looked back to the world he knew. Golden sunlight bathed the fields behind him, among deep green hedgerows bursting with spring's joy. The rooftops of cottages rose like little crowns. Their chimneys sent up faint threads of smoke, and their windows caught the light like tiny jewels. As he walked past them, the air came alive. Birdsong filled the sky. The sweet scent of blossoms drifted through the breeze, and the whole world seemed to pause, dressing itself in twilight's softest colors, ready to welcome the evening star. And just before that star lit the sky, Alveric found what he was searching for. A small cottage stood near the edge of the village, weathered by time but solid and warm-looking. Above its doorway flapped a great square of dark brown leather, swaying gently in the wind. Etched in strange, curling letters picked out in dull gold, the sign declared its message clearly to those who could read it. Here lived the leatherworker. And Alveric knew. This was the man who would help prepare him for what lay beyond the border of the real. When Alveric knocked, the cottage door creaked open, and an old man appeared, stooped with age, his back curved like a question mark shaped by time. As soon as Alveric spoke his name, the old man bent a little deeper, a quiet gesture of respect. Without delay, Alveric asked for a scabbard to be made, though he said nothing of the strange sword it was meant to carry. The two stepped inside. The cottage was warm, the air thick with the scent of firewood and leather. By a great hearth, the old man's wife sat beside the flames, her silver hair glowing like threads of starlight. She rose slowly, offering Alveric a nod filled with quiet honor. They welcomed him not as a stranger, but as someone destined for something larger. The old man settled beside a thick, battered table, its wooden top gleaming in patches where hands had worked for generations. All across its surface were tiny holes and dents, the memory of a lifetime spent shaping leather, and perhaps even the lifetimes before his. Alveric unwrapped the sword. He placed it carefully on the old man's lap. The craftsman leaned closer, his faded eyes narrowing with curiosity. The hilt and guard were rough, untamed metal. No polish, no ornament, only raw purpose. The blade itself was broad and strangely balanced, whispering of magic in its weight. The old man ran his fingers along its edge, thoughtful. He wasn't surprised by its power, just intrigued by its challenge. His fingers tapped the wood lightly. His mind had already slipped into the language of his trade. After a few minutes of silent study, he gave a tiny nod to himself. He knew what needed to be done. His wife, already understanding his quiet signals, brought over a fine piece of hide, dark, strong, and supple. With careful hands, he began to mark the leather. 2 shapes, each as wide as the strange sword, and just a bit more, to leave space for magic. Whenever the old man asked questions about the gleaming, wide-bladed sword, Alveric gave only half answers, carefully dodging the truth. He didn't want to trouble the old man's thoughts with tales of enchantments and far-off realms. Some things, he felt, were better left unspoken, but he did surprise them later with a simple human request. "Could I stay the night here?" he asked, almost as if it were nothing. The old couple looked at each other in silence. then at him, with a mix of awe and worry, as though a prince had asked to sleep in their humble home. "Oh yes, yes, of course," the old woman said quickly, hands fluttering nervously. "We'd be honored," added her husband, bowing slightly. "But we're sorry. It's a poor place for guests." They treated him not like a stranger, but like a legend stepped down from the mountains. Dinner came bubbling in a blackened cauldron, the air filled with the earthy aroma of herbs and wild game. It was a hearty stew, thick with whatever the old man had trapped in the nearby woods. Rabbits, roots, maybe even a squirrel or two. It was a mystery that didn't need solving, for it warmed the belly like a blessing. Alveric tried gently to refuse their bed, but they wouldn't hear of it. "No, no, you take it," the old woman insisted, patting his arm. "You'll need your strength for wherever you're going." And so they laid out a pile of old fur and animal skins by the fire for themselves, smiling as if it were a gift to sleep near the flames. That night, while Alveric rested on a bed that smelled faintly of dried lavender and years gone by, the old couple slept soundly in their little nest of hides, the firelight dancing on their worn faces. Outside, beyond the chimney's smoke and the trees' whispers, the pale mountains of Faerie stood untouched, waiting. After dinner, as the night deepened and the fire crackled low, the old man carefully cut the two broad pieces of leather, both ending in sharp points, like the blade they were meant to guard. His hands, though wrinkled with age, moved with precision. Thread and needle worked in rhythm as he stitched along both edges, turning hide into something noble, a home for a sword born of magic. Alveric watched in silence for a while, then gently broke it. "Which path should I take in the morning?" he asked. The old man paused only briefly before answering, never lifting his eyes from the leather. "Well now, to the north the woods stretch deep but safe. To the south there's the river and the meadows, fair walking ground. West leads you back to Erl. Northeast there's farmland and hills." He spoke easily, confidently, but never once did he mention the east, nor southeast, not even a glance in that direction. Alveric noticed, though he said nothing at first. He pressed again. "And to the east?" The old man hesitated just for a moment, his hands slowing. Then he shrugged as if brushing away a fly. "Nothing there worth walking toward, just mist and empty land." The old woman, who was tidying by the hearth, stiffened slightly but didn't turn around. She too said nothing. It was strange. They lived so close to the edge of the known world, where the sky touched the ground and the fields thinned into myth. And yet, they spoke of everything but what lay beyond that invisible border. To them, it seemed, the East wasn't just unknown, it was untouchable. And Alveric, though respectful of their silence, understood one thing very clearly. Tomorrow, he would walk straight into the direction no one dared to name. Lying in the warm bed the old couple had so humbly given up for him, Alveric stared at the dark wooden ceiling, the soft orange glow of the dying fire flickering on the walls. The old man's words from earlier echoed in his mind, not for what they said, but for what they didn't. Not once had the man mentioned the East, not even in passing. Was it forgetfulness born of age, or something far more deliberate? Alveric turned slowly beneath the heavy quilts, eyes still open. He thought of the old leather worker, of the firm way his voice had danced around that one direction. Was it possible that long ago he himself had once journeyed east, beyond the fields they called home, and simply chosen silence over story? And if he had, what had he seen there that was better left unspoken? Alveric tried to picture it, but even his imagination failed him. The east now seemed less like a direction and more like a veil, thin and silent, that hid something ancient. At last, sleep crept in, and dreams took him. And in those dreams he saw the old man younger, wandering through strange glowing woods, whispering with trees that had silver for bark, and rivers that ran like liquid light. He saw shadowy creatures just out of sight, and towers that bent toward stars not seen in our sky. But none of it was clear. None of it offered a path. When Alveric awoke, he had only one guide, the ghost-like silhouette of the distant Elfin mountains, pale blue and unreal, waiting like a riddle on the horizon. The old man gently woke Alveric as the first light of dawn filtered through the wooden shutters. His voice was soft like wind brushing through autumn leaves. When Alveric stepped into the small day room, a warm fire danced in the hearth, crackling softly, and the smell of fresh bread and herbs filled the air. His breakfast was already laid out, humble but comforting, and beside it, the scabbard, crafted to perfection, cradled the sword as if it had always belonged there. Neither the old man nor his wife spoke much. They moved with quiet grace, serving him with silent kindness. When Alveric reached into his pouch to pay for the scabbard, they accepted it with a nod. But when he offered something for their food, their fire, and the bed they had given him, they simply shook their heads. Their hospitality, it seemed, was a gift, the kind one doesn't repay with coin. When it was time to leave, Alveric stood, slinging the sword across his back. The couple followed him to the door without a word. They stood in the morning mist, eyes full of unspoken thoughts, watching him step out onto the path. Their gaze clung to him, silently pleading, "Go north or west, anywhere but east." But Alveric, without pause, turned toward the pale, distant silhouette of the Elfin mountains. And the moment he took that first step in their direction, the couple looked away. Not in anger, not even in fear, just as if that part of the world no longer existed in their hearts. They turned back into the cottage, and Alveric walked on, toward the unknown, where even memories dared not follow. Even though the old couple no longer watched him from the doorway, Alveric turned and lifted his hand in farewell. It wasn't just a gesture, it was respect, a quiet goodbye to a world of warm fires, honest hands, and familiar skies. He felt a deep connection to these cottages, these humble fields, a tenderness that those villagers could never feel for the wild mystery of the enchanted lands he now walked toward. The morning air sparkled with early light, crisp and full of promise. Every step he took carried him through memories etched since childhood. The ground felt known beneath his boots. Soft earth, familiar stones, paths shaped by years of simple journeys. Around him, nature whispered in color and song. In the meadows, the ruddy orchids bloomed ahead of time, standing proud like little messengers of spring. Bluebells, now just past their peak, swayed gently beside them, their glory fading with grace. The young oak leaves, still curled and golden brown, hinted at strength not yet realized. The beech trees shimmered, their fresh leaves catching the sun like burnished brass, and from their branches, the call of the cuckoo echoed, clear, melodic, and hauntingly distant. A birch tree stood at the edge of the woodland, elegant and wild, as though a forest spirit had wrapped herself in soft green silk and paused to watch him pass. On thorny bushes kissed by morning sun, tiny buds of May pushed through, pale, pink, and full of life. All around him, the land breathed in spring. But Alveric, he walked with purpose beyond it. Every flower, every bird song, every scent was a gentle goodbye, the land itself blessing his departure, without knowing if it would ever welcome him home again. Alveric whispered farewell to every tree, every breeze, every songbird, again and again, as if the land might listen. But the cuckoo kept calling, its voice echoing in the spring air, calm, distant, and indifferent. It did not call for him. Then, parting the final hedgerow, he stepped into a lonely, untamed field, and there it was. Just as his father had once described in hushed tones, the twilight frontier. It stretched across the land like a shimmering curtain of deep blue mist, thick and glowing, as if moonlight had pooled into the air itself. The world beyond it looked strange and warped, as though light obeyed different rules there. Trees bent at odd angles, shadows shimmered where there should be none. Everything within seemed dreamlike, or maybe a dream unraveling. Alveric paused. He turned, one last time, to the familiar countryside behind him, the safe, sunlit world he'd always known. The cuckoo still called, rhythmically, unbothered. A small bird chirped, hopping from branch to branch, lost in its own tiny universe. The earth gave him no sign, no answer to his silent goodbyes. No one watched, no one stopped him. And so, he stepped forward. With a deep breath and steady heart, Alveric crossed the threshold into the twilight, and the light swallowed him whole, like the page of an old story, turning into something strange and unknown. Not far away in the waking world, a man whistled for his horses in a quiet field. Voices drifted in from a nearby lane, light and real. threads of life still buzzing behind him. But the moment Alveric stepped into the twilight, everything began to fade. The voices, the whistling, even the whisper of the wind. They softened to distant echoes like faint memories underwater. In just a few steps more, there was silence. Absolute, otherworldly silence. Behind him, the familiar world vanished like smoke. The fresh green hedgerows, the fields that smelled of spring, all gone. When he turned to look, the twilight wall loomed like a storm cloud behind him, dark and swirling, its edges blurring reality like breath on glass. He spun slowly, heart pounding, and what lay before him was not the world he knew. Gone was the soft beauty of May. In its place rose the vast, unearthly splendor of Elfland, glowing hills that shimmered with colors no mortal eye had names for, forests that whispered to themselves in voices older than time, and skies that pulsed with starlight even though the sun had not set. Everything was strange, everything was alive, and nothing belonged to Earth anymore. Alveric had crossed over, and there was no going back. Before Alveric rose the pale blue mountains, vast and majestic, their peaks glowing as if kissed by heaven's own light. They shimmered beneath a golden radiance that seemed to pour from the sky itself, not in still beams, but in living waves, a rhythm of golden breezes flowing down their slopes like music made of light. And far below those peaks, nestled deep in the heart of that strange land, he saw them, tall silver spires rising like dreams into the sky, so distant and delicate they almost looked like air itself turned to crystal. It was the legendary palace, the one only spoken of in ancient songs, now real before his eyes. Alveric stood on a wide open plain, but this was no earthly meadow. The flowers were alien, their petals gleaming with colors that shifted as you looked at them like living gemstones. The trees twisted skyward with shapes impossible and unreal, some arching like bridges, some spiraling as if reaching for stars, their bark pulsing faintly with light. A hush lay over everything, not silent but sacred, like a world holding its breath. Without hesitation, heart pounding with wonder, Alveric stepped forward, his eyes locked on the distant silver towers that shimmered in the enchanted air. And so, his journey into the heart of Elfland truly began. For those who've always kept their imagination safely fenced within the boundaries of the world we know, it may be hard to truly see the place where Alveric had stepped. How do I make you see that open, glowing plain, where scattered trees swayed like dancers in a dream, and far, far away, a dark, enchanted forest held secrets older than time? From that forest rose a palace unlike any built by human hands, its silver spires slicing through the sky like frozen moonlight. And beyond all this, towering in stillness, stood a range of mountains so silent, so holy, that no sunlight of our world could ever truly paint their peaks. If my words fail to bring Elfland to life in your mind, if you can't see its peaks or feel its wonder, then perhaps my imagination should have stayed trapped in the familiar. But know this, in Elfland, the colors run deeper than any sunset you've seen. The air itself glows, a soft golden shimmer like light flowing through honey and dreams. Every tree, every blade of grass, every petal of every flower, they shine not just with light, but with a kind of memory, as if June had looked into a mirror of water and become something more. Trying to describe the color of Elfland feels impossible, but maybe we've all seen a piece of it without even knowing. It's there in the deep indigo of a summer sky, just after the last light of sunset fades away. It's in the soft glow of Venus, quietly lighting up the twilight sky like a forgotten dream. It's in the still waters of a lake at dusk, where shadows and reflections blend into something more than real. These are not just colors. They are echoes of a world that touches ours only in the quietest moments. Long ago, maybe one curious rhododendron, unlike the sunflowers that always chase the sun, turned its bloom toward Elfland. And in that moment, it caught a spark of enchantment, something it carries even now in its glowing petals. Even artists, those dreamers with paintbrushes, have seen it. While painting familiar hills and fields, their minds must have slipped for a second, catching a fleeting glimpse of the pale blue mountains of Elfland. And what they painted afterward wasn't just a landscape. It was a memory of something magical, something that didn't quite belong to this world. That's why sometimes a painting feels too perfect, too mysterious, like it's whispering secrets from a place we've never been, but somehow remember. And so, Alveric stepped boldly into the glowing air of Elfland, a world that we only remember in half-forgotten dreams or flashes of inspiration. Instantly, something changed inside him. He no longer felt alone. In our world, there's an invisible wall, one that silently separates humans from every other living thing. Even just a day without another person can make you feel isolated. But here, in this strange, shimmering land beyond twilight, that wall was gone. The moment Alveric crossed over, he felt it, the connection. Crows strolling lazily across the moor looked at him with curious, knowing eyes. Tiny forest creatures peeked from behind twisted roots and glowing mushrooms, studying him with a mix of wonder and disbelief. They all seemed to whisper the same silent question: who is this man who came from a place no one returns from? Very few had ever crossed into Elfland. Fewer still had dared go where he now walked, for the king of Elfland guarded his daughter with magic old and deep. And though Alveric didn't know how, he could feel it in his bones. The eyes watching him sparkled, not just with curiosity, but with something more. Perhaps a quiet joy at seeing a traveler so bold, or perhaps a silent warning: tread carefully, stranger. Nothing here is ever what it seems. Strangely enough, this new world felt less mysterious than the one he had left behind. In our own lands, mystery hides in the shadows, behind thick oak trunks in the fading light, beyond hills that roll into mist, or deep in woods where something unseen might always be watching. But Elfland was different. Here, nothing lurked unseen. There were no whispers hiding in the wind, no secret glances from the shadows. If something was strange, you saw it clearly. If a creature dwelled in the woods, it lived in the open, under sunlight that shimmered like gold dust. The unusual, the magical, the fantastic. All of it was laid bare in front of Alveric, bold and unhidden, as though this land had no need for secrets. Everything Elfland held, it offered up freely to the eyes, and yet somehow, that made it even more enchanting. The magic in that land was so powerful and deep that it wasn't just the animals and people who understood each other. Even the trees seemed to share a silent language with men. Alveric walked past lonely pine trees scattered across the moor. Their trunks glowed softly with a warm, reddish light, as if they had captured the last glow of some ancient sunset and kept it alive through magic. The branches stretched out like arms, bending slightly as if trying to get a better look at him, almost like the trees were alive in a different way, as if they once had stories to tell beyond just being trees. It felt like they wanted to speak, to share secrets from a time long before enchantment wrapped around this land. But Alveric didn't pause. He ignored the silent warnings from beasts and trees alike. With firm steps, he moved forward, his eyes fixed on the enchanted forest waiting ahead.